Check sound. السادة الحضور، ندعوكم لأخذ مقاعدكم لبدء جلستنا التالية.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated as we begin our next session. Thank you. Okay.
حضورنا الكريم،
لا اوكي عندي اوكي هي شغال تشيك.
حضورنا الكريم، جلستنا التالية تحمل عنوان السياسات التي ترسم ملامح الاقتصاد القائم على الذكاء الاصطناعي.
Moving on to the fourth session titled Policies Shaping AI-Driven Economies.
تستضيف الجلسة كل من البروفيسور إليزابيث تشرشل، أستاذة ورئيسة قسم في جامعة محمد بن زايد للذكاء الاصطناعي.
We have Professor Elizabeth Churchill, Professor and Department Chair at MBZUAI.
والبروفيسور سانا كاريغاني، أستاذة ممارسات الذكاء الاصطناعي في كلية كينغز لندن.
Professor Sana Khareghani, Professor of Practice in AI, King's College, London.
والتر باسكاريلي، مستشار وباحث ومتحدث في سياسات الذكاء الاصطناعي التوليدي.
And Walter Pasquarelli, advisor, researcher, and speaker on GenAI Policy.
يدير هذه الجلسة رون يونغ، مؤسس مجموعة شركاء المعرفة.
This session will be moderated by Ron Young, founder of Knowledge Associates International Group. We kindly invite you to begin this session. Please welcome on stage.
Okay. Yep, my hands there. What? Is the mic on? So good? Okay. And okay, welcome everybody to this final session before lunch. Yes, my name is Ron Young. My background is really in writing international standards, first for knowledge, ISO 30401 in 2018, then innovation management, ISO 56001 this year, September 2024, and ISO 42001, which is the AI management standard, which was published in December 2023. Welcome to this session on policy shaping AI-driven economies. As AI continues to reshape industry, society, and daily life, thoughtful, inclusive policies are essential to ensure that its benefits are widely shared and ethically grounded. So today we're going to take a very brief look at some of the key policy areas, from ethical frameworks, economic growth, education, workforce impacts, innovation, AI for the social good. It's a very broad area that we're talking, and the way that it's shaping and harnessing AI's potential. I'm thrilled to introduce our expert speakers today, who bring diverse insights into how we can build a responsible and resilient AI-powered future. So I'm going to start, if I may, with Professor Sana Khareghani. Welcome. And may I start with you? You are a professor of practice at AI in King's College, London, trustee for the Future of Work, an independent research and development institute exploring how new technologies are transferring work and working lives. As AI policy lead for Responsible AI UK and advisor and former head of the UK Government Office for Artificial Intelligence, which covered digital, culture, media, business, energy, industry, and much, much more. Tell me a little more about your work, your interests, and your initial thoughts on policies shaping AI economies.
Thank you very much, Ron. It's such a pleasure to be here with you today at the Knowledge Summit in Dubai. I've been working, as you said, at the intersection of technology and business for over 2 decades, and predominantly over the past decade in government policy and transformation, culminating in setting up the Office for AI, which was at the heart of the UK government. We published the UK's National AI Strategy and the AI Regulation White Paper. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about where I think we are at the moment. Essentially, right now, I think that we are on the cusp of seeing the productivity gains from AI adoption. So far, it's been a lot slower than the expectations and all of the hype demanded. But I posit that's for 2 main reasons. The first one is that we're still not entirely sure of the optimal ways of using things like large language models in many cases. We haven't found the killer app for these things yet. And then the second is appropriate and clear regulation. Especially for our most traditional sectors, I think not knowing where liability lies or what to expect if/when things go wrong makes leaders nervous about adopting AI technologies at large scales. I'm going to use a crude analogy here, but it wasn't until the invention of the seatbelt that people started to drive cars really, really fast. So we're not going to be able to see fast adoption of these technologies until we get an AI seatbelt or clear AI regulation. I thought it also might be useful to do a very quick rundown of where we are with regulation, if that's all right. So we today have the EU AI Act that was created by the European Commission. We have the UK government's approach to AI regulation, and we have the United States executive order. But we also have a brand new government in the UK. So we have a Labour government that's been talking about an AI bill that should be coming out any day now. And we also have a new president-elect in the United States who is very likely to repeal President Biden's executive order. So I'm going to park the fact that these changes are happening just for a moment and give you a rundown of where things stand until they change. So we have the risk-based approach, which is a horizontal legislation in the EU AI Act. This means that the law applies to any and all AI systems placed or used within the EU. But there's also an extraterritorial aspect to that, which means actually it doesn't matter if it was created in the EU, the law still applies. There is, in the UK, the principle-based vertical approach, which means that the UK is relying on the expertise of existing regulators and their deep sectoral knowledge to tailor the implementation of regulation based on the specific context of that AI regulation. And the principles this is based on are 5. The first is safety, security, and robustness. The second is appropriate transparency and explainability. The third is fairness, accountability, and governance. And the fourth is contestability, and the fifth is redress. So the question comes, which one of these 2 ways, horizontal or vertical, is the right way? Who knows? Probably neither. Actually, the answer is probably somewhere in the middle. And what we've seen is that these approaches are getting closer to each other. Just to kind of round off, the US has, under President Biden, an executive order which very clearly lays out a huge number of voluntary regulatory methods. Again, it's very likely that President Trump, when he's in office, will repeal this. There's a question about what the new rules and regulations under Trump will look like. There is a potential that he'll go back to his original term in 2019. He had something called American AI. So this was about putting, lowering boundaries of adoption across federal governments, and also directing US government agencies to lower regulation and create more innovative, friendly regulation to allow faster adoption of AI technology, so using existing regulation rather than creating anything new. It's also unlikely that Trump is going to want to introduce anything to slow down innovation by his startups in the country. So there's a question mark right now around the future of the AI Safety Institute as well. For me, the key is that we need to get the right policies in place to ensure that we do not develop these technologies in a vacuum. AI technologies are affecting the way we work, the way we study, the way we play, and the way that we live. So there's a real imperative on working together to get this right today.
Thank you, Sana. I'm going to move to you, Walter. Walter Pasquarelli. You are an internationally recognized advisor to Google, Microsoft, Coca-Cola, Meta. You're an international speaker and expert on AI strategy, generative AI, and data governance. You specialize in strategic planning, AI policy, ethical and regulatory frameworks, and macroeconomic technology trends. You led the first globally focused AI index, benchmarking countries' readiness to uptake emerging technologies across key industries and markets. So tell us more about your experience, interests, and initial thoughts on policies for AI-driven economies.
Well, thank you so much, first of all, for the very kind introduction, and especially to all the organizing team here who have put together this wonderful event and has brought us here from all over the world. So my name is Walter Pasquarelli, really a pleasure being here. A little bit about myself. I first spent my career working at the Economies, where I used to cover the development of AI, both from a technological point of view as well as from the point of view of like policy development. Next to my work that I'm doing right now in advising governments and businesses, I'm also an affiliate at the Bennett Institute in Cambridge, and I'm an advisor to the OECD. So as far as AI readiness is concerned, and when it comes to what should a country be doing in order to support their AI ecosystem become the best possible version of themselves, there's actually a few things that historically we used to look at. The one thing is, of course, the infrastructure. We used to look at the policy and the regulatory environment, as well as the political will that countries have, and of course, the startup ecosystem. Now, part of advising the UAE, part of the challenge is that the UAE is incredibly good when it comes to AI policy and regulation, and in the past years, they have been doing a lot of progress as far as AI policies is concerned. So this year, I'm aware that there has been the launch of MGX, which is like a $100 billion investment fund, which will be working in infrastructure, in chip manufacturing. So there is a lot of work that is already being undertaken. When asking myself, what is the way that I could potentially add some value to this conversation? I think, as Professor Khareghani already highlighted, there is a lot going on in terms of AI regulatory developments. She described, I think, in a very detailed manner how the US has been approaching things. And of course, as we are all aware, there have been elections in the last 2 weeks in the United States. And those elections and the incoming administrations will bring up some major changes to the world of AI policy. Now, over the past year, I've been spending some time interacting both with US policymakers as well as with some people within the inner circle of the incoming US presidency. And I would like to outline a few points that I think will be relevant to understand as far as the new US AI policy approach is concerned. Roughly speaking, I believe that we can summarize the US AI policy, the upcoming AI policy, into 5 steps that we call the 5 Ds. The first one is going to be deregulation. And as Professor Khareghani already explained, we can expect a departure from possibly the executive order towards an AI policy framework that will be more innovation friendly. So one that has even less standards, has even less stringent requirements than the one that we see today, but possibly a return to the US AI agenda. So one that is really even more private sector friendly. So that is a very sharp distinction from what we see in the European Union, for example. The other point is this decentralization, and this is an influence that I think has been pushed predominantly from Mr. Musk, who has been a key advisor to the current, to the Trump administration and the policies that they will be developing. J.D. Vance, the VP-elect himself as well, is a big fan of these open source approaches. So we can see, I think, a lot of policies that will be promoting this ideas of developing open source AI models, again, to, on the one hand, focus more on the innovation, less on the regulation and the safeguards, but more on putting the uses of these technologies directly into the hands of users and consumers. The third step is then decoupling. Decoupling is basically the idea that the United States will be involved less in international fora, such as the OECD, such as the General Partnership on AI, mostly because there's going to be an inward focus and less of a priority in trying to shape the institutions that develop the standards surrounding AI development. That is something that was relatively similar as well between 2016 and 2020, where the majority of international AI policies initiatives were spearheaded by the Canadians and the French, and I think with the incoming administration, this is going to be very similar as well. The fourth point is going to be defunding. The Trump administration, from the sources that we have observed, from the sources that we have obtained, will be putting more a priority on tariffs and export controls, as opposed to including subsidies or promoting the development through tax breaks, as we have seen in the CHIPS Act, which saw $53 billion in subsidies for the developing of domestic chip manufacturing facilities. There is a good chance that some of these elements surrounding the CHIPS Act will stay, but from what we can see, a lot of the funding that has been provided will be scaled down a bit. And the final point is then domestic energy, which means effectively a departure from renewables. Trump has repeatedly come up with statements such as drill baby drill, which effectively means prioritizing natural or traditional energy sources such as oil and gas. We have seen that one of the reasons for that is that a lot of the data centers that are being used to train these AI models effectively face energy shortages, and because renewables are not able to keep up with them yet, the incoming US administration will likely prioritize traditional energy sources in order to be able to meet those energy demands. There's a number of implications this will have for the UAE and a number of opportunities. The number one thing, just to keep it short, and I'll be happy to elaborate on that later on today, is that there is a real regulatory gap that they're able to fill. The European Union AI Act will now become the de facto most important regulation that is out there, but there's a lot of companies that might find them too stringent. So there's an opportunity for the UAE to provide almost a different regulatory regime that still focuses on safety more than the US one, but has a more pro-innovation approach compared to the European Union. So there it's about finding the middle ground. And the other thing is, with the US stepping out from some of these international standards, again, the UAE has an opportunity here to be able to shape the global policies and standards within international bodies, but also developing their own institutions, primarily for emerging economies and the global south.
Thank you, Walter, thank you. And now I'm going to move on to Professor Elizabeth Churchill, if I may. Welcome. Since May this year, you are the Professor and Department Chair for MBZUAI, which is the Mohammed bin Zayed University of Artificial Intelligence, which is a research-based academic institution located in Abu Dhabi. You are the Professor of Human-Computer Interaction, HCI, with an established track record in building research and design teams in a number of key technology companies, including Google, eBay, Yahoo, and Fuji Xerox. And for almost 10 years, until you joined MBZUAI, you were a senior director at Google in the San Francisco Bay Area, and much more. So please tell us a little more about your work interests and your initial thoughts on this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the organizers. Thank you to my colleagues on this panel. And thank you to the audience for being here and listening to us. So the first thing I'm going to tell you is a little bit of a personal journey, which is I arrived in the UAE about 13 weeks ago. And I moved out of industry, and I've been in industry in Silicon Valley for several years, almost 3 decades. And I chose to come here and to come into academia for a couple of reasons. One is I think that this area has been investing so much in innovation, and as per the university that I have joined, being the University of AI, the first graduate university of AI in the world, I believe, I came because of the investment. And the investment here was prescient, because this university has been around for about 5 years. So before the big hoopla about AI. And one of the reasons I was so excited to be here is because I do believe the leadership of this country is thinking critically and effectively, is looking to other places to see what governance, regulation, and standards should look like, could look like, all in service of a sustainability desire. Sustainability of climate, but sustainability of healthcare, education, etc. The investment here is absolutely amazing, and that's why I chose to come here. I chose to come here also as an educator, because I believe, as somebody who thinks about the next generation a lot, if we can educate the next generation who will be the leaders of the next generation, who will be in this part of the world, which is taking a real stance to be a thought leader in the future, then I think we can do something really good together. So with that said, I want to say a little bit more about my discipline and what I actually sort of focus on. And so while my colleagues here, my esteemed colleagues, work often at the governance and policy level, I work at the design level of looking at how do you design from the pixels on your phone screen to the policies. I partner with folks like my esteemed colleagues here to look at what are the data that we need, the actual data of use. What are the design processes and practices in organizations that are small and large that lead to AI-related products for consumers and at larger scale for industries? What are the processes of design, and how are things checked, tested, evaluated, and iterated upon before they are released and taken up? What are the iterative processes that we need to have in place in order to make sure that we are understanding impact, addressing potential unintended and negative consequences, and thinking in a speculative design kind of way, but critical thinking about what we should build. Just because we can build it, should we build it? So my research, my career has been about trying to work with folks to say what are the right standards and why, what governance is needed, what does agile governance look like? And when I say agile governance, I mean a governance that can actually move as fast as the technology is moving. My colleagues here have been talking about the speed of change. We need our governance and our standards processes to be designed to keep up with that speed of change, but also to leapfrog ahead and say, we think that this is where we're going. We think these are the guardrails that need to be in place. And I've got one last thing to say that comes very specifically from the design world and comes back to the seatbelt analogy. When seatbelts were first put out there into the world, a fantastic safety opportunity. However, women of smaller frame and children were harmed by those seatbelts until a lot of analysis was done to understand what the right seatbelt was and how it should be modified, and how how do seatbelts work for multiple different kinds of shapes and forms and bodies. So back to that wonderful analogy, thank you for that. The guardrails need to be evaluated, iterated upon, designed and redesigned with a clear eye to swift action and change and agility. And we can only do that if we come into the conversation, all of us, experts and non-experts, multidisciplinary approaches, because the impacts of AI are multifaceted and require multidisciplinary way of thinking. So the department I'm setting up at this university, specifically focused on human-centered AI, human-computer and computation interaction, will be multidisciplinary. We'll be looking at how we educate the next generation to come in with the critical faculties, the design sensibilities, to think ethically and to work at all levels of the stack, from the pixel to the policy, with partners in multidisciplinarity to get it right. So we all should be in this conversation. So thank you again so much for having us all here.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Thank you. What I'm picking up, and what I would like just your comment, we've only a few more minutes left, but the EU AI Act, the first regulation, international standards, the EU AI Office have actually said that they welcome standards for knowledge and innovation and AI. They were designed primarily for organizational efficiency and effectiveness. And what the EU AI Act is about as well is human rights, privacy, fairness, human-centric considerations. And so the standards bodies have been tasked with working on that over the next 6, 9, 12 months to then better comply with the EU AI Act. It's this human dimension that I'm interested in. I'm interested in the mindset. But in the few minutes we have, what are your comments on, is there a bridge between regulation and standards and policy making? How do you see that? Anybody like to lead on that one briefly?
Maybe I'll start us off. So I absolutely see a bridge between standards, policy, and regulation. I see standards as a mechanism to allow interoperability across international borders. I think it's really, really difficult to agree across international borders exactly what the policies and regulations that govern these technologies are and what each economy actually needs.
Yep.
But I think standards offer us this ability to create interoperability and allows companies to share the applications and via APIs and various other things, allow these technologies to work and manifest themselves within these different communities, but still allow the vibrancy of that community to come through. So much to kind of what Elizabeth was talking about, AI applications that work will need to have the flavor and need to be solving the challenges that are meaningful and important for each community. And so standards, I think, gives us that opportunity to have the safeguards in place, but allow us to have these different flavors of applications.
And just picking up on that very quickly, standards are frameworks for thinking. And without frameworks for thinking, we have the monolithic, AI is terrifying, AI will solve the world. And actually, it's somewhere in between. So as we develop standards based in experience and data and acknowledging and honoring cross-cultural differences, we create frameworks for dialogue and for thinking. So sometimes people say standards are restrictive. Standards are there to be part of a conversation, to anchor a conversation that's a creative conversation of inclusion of different voices. So just very much a +1 and very much very invested in thinking about what those standards could be, should be, might be, and how they change over time.
Yeah, Walter.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, I agree with everything that my esteemed colleagues have just said. Perhaps one of the things that I think is important to add to the conversation as we're approaching an era where AI development and AI resources are not just concentrated in the hands of organizations, is that I think standards are super important. I think standards work. They provide an anchor, a northern light for organizations to be able to know what to do with a technology that is developing so fast. But with generative AI, another element or another layer that needs to be added is the management of open source communities. And I'm saying this because a lot of these tools are pretty democratized. A lot of these tools are accessible to anyone, easy to use, and a lot of times also without any kinds of guardrails. Managing those through policies or standards or regulation is going to be a lot harder, and a lot harder also to control, because it's easier to understand how entities are using particular technologies. It's a lot harder to do that when we're looking at specific individuals. And the risk there, the risk profiles, are very different. That's an area where I think there's a lot of government action and a lot of policy focus needed, particularly as we approach an era where epistemic risk and information security and what we identify as being authentic and real is increasingly being challenged. Thank you.
Thank you, Walter. I'm afraid we're out of time, but I would like to, I hope you got some good insights, some good ideas from that session. I'd like to thank the speakers very much for your contribution. I'd like to thank the audience for your interest, and I'd like to thank the Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum Knowledge Foundation for creating this session. Thank you very much, and enjoy your lunch.